So I definitely hear kind of what you're talking about around it. The convention would be a process for those delegates to travel the path of understanding what all goes into good government. But then at the end of that process, whatever they come up with still has to get voted on.
Yeah.
So how does that, at the end of the day, change
the voters?
Same
dynamic?
Exact dynamic.
In other states, constitutional conventions are televised. It's the ultimate in reality television. Because the conventioneers will come from your communities, you will likely know somebody who's going to that convention. And every night you'll go home and you'll turn on PBS, public access television, because the Constitutional Convention will be talking about Prop 13, something that you're interested in, you want to hear what they have to say. And over the period of 4 to 6 months that the Constitutional Convention goes through its work, the media will be editorializing. It will become the topic of conversation at the water cooler, and people will become, over time, they will become educated to the issues that are being discussed inside the Constitutional Convention. It won't just be a process that educates the conventioneers, it'll be a process that educates the general public. The initiative process is generally one where, the proponents throw a bunch of money at it for 2 weeks, and the opponents throw another bunch of money at it for 2 weeks. They write very convoluted language that goes for title and summary, and it takes 15 attorneys at the Attorney General's office to work out what exactly it is they're trying to do. Somebody runs a competing measure saying vote no on this to do this and yes on that, and it ends up being a pretty messy situation where the voters tend to look at who endorsed the particular measures and go, well, that's good enough, that's what I'll vote for. They vote from a position of ignorance. The Constitutional Convention will educate the voters in a way that they can't be educated in an initiative process. It'll be a 6-month viewing process where people will become engaged. And that happens in other states.
I have a question. How do each of you guys find yourselves making it, or making either your initiatives or putting a copy of the Constitutional Convention on the ballot? Is it by gathering signatures? Is it by, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll be running a ballot initiative campaign. So gathering signatures, we'll be filing probably in a couple of weeks or so, and it'll sort of run the sort of normal route of the initiative process.
The Courage Campaign is currently working with a number of different progressive organizations from around the state to, again, look at doing some ballot initiative campaigns in 2010, potentially around the 2/3 rule, for example. That would be done through, again, signature gathering. As a Courage Campaign, we have 700,000 members online. We're very keenly interested in finding ways to have volunteers do the signature gathering as much as possible. Not only to reduce the cost, but to show people that this is actually a genuinely grassroots-oriented effort. The last initiative to be put on the ballot solely through volunteer gathered signatures was in 1982. That being said, Prop 215, which legalized medical marijuana in 1996, was done largely through volunteer signature gathering. And there have been a number of ballot initiative efforts in the last 20 years that have had a substantial component of volunteer gathered signatures. We actually think that's going to be wave of the future, to use a cliched term. I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of that in California politics, and that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah, if you, we have to go through the signature gathering process as well. We have 2 initiatives going on the ballot next year. We're submitting them for title and summary in the next couple of weeks, and we'll need to submit several million signatures by April of next year. And we are also looking at volunteer signature gathering. It's one of the reforms we would like to see is just the complete abolition of paid signature gathering. It's an absolute abomination that that people prostitute initiatives outside Safeway, and again, it's just the power and influence of money that has taken over our initiative process. So we would like to lead by example and collect our signatures through a volunteer army, and we know how difficult that is. As Robert said, it's been, I think, Alan Cranston organized the state county by county or assembly district by assembly district, and I think that's sort of the last time it was done successfully. Prop 11 tried last year. The League of Women Voters made a real honest effort, but then eventually at the 11th hour had to engage paid signature gatherers. But we would like to do that, and we think it's the right way to go and sets the right tone for the campaign.
Well, as mentioned earlier, we're working in an advisory capacity with Repair California to flesh out some of the details, but we also work with municipal government and government at a variety of levels to educate about the type of reforms that we promote and support. So, for example, the city of Sacramento is looking at potentially using ranked choice voting for their municipal elections. The city of Albany is considering proportional representation. San Jose is looking at using ranked choice voting. LA City and County is looking at ranked choice voting. Pasadena and Long Beach are looking at ranked choice voting. And Oakland and Berkeley will start using ranked choice voting in the next election cycle. So one of the things we do is we very much are on the ground working with community organizations, working with elected officials, working with election officials to give all the information that they need to make good decisions. And then once they move to adopt one of these other forms of elections, then we work with them and other organizations like the League of Women Voters to make sure that the voters have all the information they need before going to the polls.
So, Blair, as part of the proportional representation, is that potentially going to make it into the Constitutional Convention, or is that going to be an issue that will be addressed at a California Constitutional Convention?
Well, that's an awfully good question. We certainly hope it's part of the mix. I think when you look at the Constitutional Convention and the limited scope of it, the limited scope includes governance and elections. And so we hope that there really is a long-term vision and saying what works for California. Right now you look at the state legislature and we have essentially the least representative state legislature in the country. There's one representative for about 470,000 people. That's 10 times the national average. The state next to California in terms of representation is Texas, and California's districts are 3 times larger. Oregon, where I lived for many years, an assembly district is about 50 or 60,000 people. So those are neighborhoods. Those are small enough where a representative is actually out at the corner grocery store, can go to PTA meetings. You can actually walk an entire district. And it really alters the equation in terms of money as well. If you have districts that are so huge, and Senate districts are twice the size, it takes an awful lot of money to run campaigns and get elected. So we would hope that that entire equation of representation is in the mix for the big picture.
Kind of on that note of limited scope, Robert, I heard that my understanding is that part of the Courage campaign's or hopes for a California Constitutional Convention would include social issues. I think that varies a little bit from Repair California, and I wanted to see if you think that may have the potential to derail kind of what the Courage campaign is going for.
I think I should clarify. Our view has been about a constitutional convention that it should not include social issues. We do not believe that those should be on the scope of a constitutional convention. I'm glad you asked that question because, the Courage campaign of last year has become known as one of the leading organizations in the state in the fight to restore marriage equality. But we believe that needs to be done at the ballot box. We've lost the ballot box. We need to win at the ballot box. We don't believe a constitutional convention is the right place to deal with marriage equality, to deal with abortion rights, to deal with immigration, to deal with any number of contentious social issues. And in fact, I'm glad it's not. California actually, one of the positive things about our Constitution, what we've been slagging on it all night, we have one of the strongest bills of rights anywhere in the country. Our First Amendment is much more expansive than any other state's. We have an Equal Rights Amendment, whereas the federal Equal Rights Amendment fell several states short back in the early 1980s. We think that needs to be protected and preserved. That's not something we would look to change in a constitutional convention. What we do believe, though, that the Constitutional Convention ought to look at is initiative reform. We saw with Prop 8 that a certain number of voters are able to take rights away from people. We think that the initiative process should, at minimum, be changed to mandate that any a constitutional amendment, as I said before, have a 2/3 threshold going forward. That would provide sufficient, some additional safeguards, I should say, to protect individual rights, the ballot box. We also would like to explore ways to ensure that nobody's rights will ever be voted on, or at least be taken away from people again at the ballot box, once, of course, we repeal Prop 8.
Sorry, I'm fighting a cold, so when I sit too long, everything you know, you spoke a little bit about just now.
Prop 8.
Prop 8, yes, and increasing the voter threshold to 2/3. Well, you know, when you talk about that, and, you know, I've talked to people about how about for initiatives you need to have, you know, a certain amount of people to be able to, you know, put it on the ballot or pass the ballot. And then the argument always is, well, let's say you want universal health care, you only want a majority vote. You know, but if you want to increase taxes, then you want 2/3, right? So it goes both ways.
It certainly does, and I think this is something that, you know, a convention ought to discuss, right? The delegates in that convention need to sit there and work out the different ramifications of how it would work, right? If you add something to this side of the scale, how does it affect the other side of the scale? And that's one of the benefits, I think, of a constitutional convention, is you can look at a system and figure out how different reforms might affect your desired system. To speak specifically about that point, I think that, you know, universal health care is something we might be able to create by a statute, where a majority of the people of California could be able to create it. But if you're talking about amending the Constitution of the state, I think there does need to be a higher standard met for that. We could look at creating a higher standard for passing a statute at the polls as well. That's something that, you know, the people of California, if you're a convention, ought to examine.
Okay, Matt, so talk about the process, like when the convention would be on the ballot, because there's, I think, 3 different times that it has to be on the ballot.
Some of you, I didn't print enough of these to bring with me, unfortunately, but some of you have these, and there's a timeline, proposed timeline for the Constitutional Convention on the back. And I say we're about a week, 10 days away from submitting our language for title and summary. Yeah, it says September 25th. We've missed that. That was a self-imposed deadline. We've missed that, obviously. And then by April of next year, we turn in our 2 million or so signatures. And then if we collect the signatures, we go to the voters in the fall of next year, November 2010, with our 2 initiatives, Prop 1A and Prop 1B. If the voters approve those 2 initiatives, then we would imagine that the Assembly, or rather the legislature, then has to provide for a constitutional convention, write the check, in other words. And the convention then would likely be held in the spring of 2012. That would take 4 to 6 months. Then the Constitutional Convention would have the authority to call a special election for the voters to approve the final outcome of that Constitutional Convention. The conventioners can also, you know, say, well, we don't want to go in 2012, we want to go in 2013. But we would hope they would go in 2012 because, as Dennis referred to, there's a crisis, and you know we don't want to waste a good crisis by letting this thing drag on for too long. So we would imagine that the voters would get the final say in the fall of 2012.
Yeah, well, we are, right now, I'm on the Revenue and Taxation Committee, and we're going through the 21st Century Commission initiatives, their proposals, and they're very controversial, right? Again, we may need 2/3 of the legislature. That means we need Republicans. Republicans don't want to increase taxes, so we may be stuck. If we are stuck and not able to make some of these big reforms, then I think we're going to be in this financial crisis for the next few years. So we're going to be able to, continue to work on it. I don't think anybody thinks the economy is going to get better anytime soon. So, how do we keep this at the forefront in case the economy does get better? Like the stock market gets a little better, like it rained today, and so maybe people don't want to talk about water anymore.
We represent the region's largest employers, and from what I'm hearing, it's not going to get that much better anytime soon. The stock market went through 10,000 today, but I don't think any of us are feeling particularly wealthy at the minute or secure in our jobs. We're in a long term. Even if the national economy recovers, California's economy is going to be a real lag, and that's primarily why we got into this fight as a business organization. When the world's economy starts to turn around, large multinational companies are going to look at where they're going to invest. and which areas are going to come back quickest, most efficiently, and where should we target our investment, where should we hire new people, where should we put our R&D facilities. The state that California is in right now, we have little or no faith that any CEO of any large corporation will invest a dime in California until we get our fiscal act in order. So that needs to be done first. And we feel that with the current recession, that should it last another year or two, it's an opportunity we can't afford to waste, and that we need to go in 2012.
Going even beyond the economic issues, I think the people of California have been woken up by this crisis. Not just the economic crisis, but the budget crisis, the political crisis, Prop 8. All these things have woken people up to the fact that the state of California's government is broken. You see consistently, not just lower ratings for the legislature, but for many California politicians, whereas Californians are in love with President Barack Obama, as I think they should be. You see a big difference. People in California believe that the federal government is more able to provide for their needs in their own state. Then surveys we at the Courage Campaign have done of our own members, of the 700,000 people that comprise our organization, they're woken up. They understand the need for changes there. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Not only just because the economy is going to suck for quite some time, but because people have this image seared into their minds of legislators sleeping at their desks, of a state that nearly closed a third of its parks, of 30,000 teachers being laid off, of budgets being late year after year after year. People are fed up with that. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I think we have an opportunity to get Californians engaged in a process of fixing their state. I mean, one of the things about living in California is slightly chauvinistic. We're California, damn it. We live in a great state. We should have a government that reflects our hopes, our dreams, and our greatness.
Well, we've answered pretty much like all the questions that have come in. If anyone has any other questions, and maybe I just have a question for all of you. Open primaries, that is going to be on the ballot. What do you feel about that? We have a large number of declined to state voters these days, and they just don't identify with either party. And so, what do you think?
We do need one of the reform areas that we would like to see addressed in a constitutional convention is the method and the process by which we select our elected officials. It doesn't work. California is a pretty purple state. It's not rabid red or rabid blue. We're largely a moderate voting bloc of people. But if you look at the legislature and how we select our elected officials, you have the real race in 99% of our elections is in the primary, because the seats are so safe that in a primary, whether it be a Republican primary or a Democratic primary, the candidate that wins is generally the one that runs closest to the base, either farthest to the left or farthest to the right. So that's where the real election is, and you get perhaps not the purple candidate, but the deep blue or the scarlet red. And when they get to Sacramento, they can't talk to each other. And you have a system and a dynamic that's dysfunctional. What we would like to see is some sort of electoral reform, be that open primary, be it some other method, where we get a more representative type of elected official going to Sacramento. And that's just one. I don't think particularly that the open primary solution is going to solve any of our problems in any large measure. I think it's a very small part of the problem, but it's a piece that needs addressed nonetheless.
So what people call the open primary is really a top two primary. An open primary is something that political scientists would call a different system. So under the top two system, what happens is candidates from all political parties run in the same primary, and then only the top two vote getters advance to the general election. So whereas people call this an open primary, I refer to it as a closed general election, because your choices are going to be limited to two candidates in the general election, and that might be two Republicans or two Democrats. The chances are incredibly slim to none that you'll see any third-party candidates on the general election ballot. And I think that's really unfortunate and anti-democratic. I think we need all the the choices that we can have for the general election. And you have to remember that elections are about ideas as well as just who's going to win and who's going to lose. Another problem with the top two is that if you have so many candidates running in the primary that it takes a very small percentage of the vote to advance to the general election. So that really increases the possibilities of having so-called spoiler candidates. You can have a whole host of moderate candidates, and if they all split the vote, then the chances are heightened that you're going to have extremists elevated to the last election, to the decisive election. As you can tell, I'm not a fan of the top two system. There's much better ways, including ranked choice voting or proportional representation, to increase representation. And I'll just add one more thing, and that is that a number of proponents claim that the top two results in more moderate candidates, but we really have yet to see any data or research backing that up.
Yeah, speaking not just as Robert Cruikshank Courage Campaign, but also as Robert Cruikshank, member of the California Democratic Party Executive Board and of the Monterey County Young Democrats, it's a terrible idea.
And as a constituent of the senator who dreamt the idea up.
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes. I am a born and raised Californian. I did live in Washington State for about 7 years, fairly recently, where this was adopted actually in the year 2006, the top two model. And what it does is it pushes primary fights out into the general election. You have a lot of districts that are fairly red or fairly blue. You'll have, instead of the Democratic primary being resolved in June and everyone coming together in the summer and working hard to elect Democrats in the fall, you're going to have that primary fight pushed out into the general election, and that will take away from the other necessary unity work that needs to be done. If people are, still in their corner for their own Democratic candidates, they're not going to be coming together to repeal Prop 8. They're not going to be coming together to elect a Democrat to the governor's office or to the presidency. Another problem, and that's actually what's happened in Washington State. All these primary ballots get pushed out into the general election. It's a waste of money, time, and resources. The other interesting effect of, as I understand the law written in California that Ava Maldonado snuck through, resembles a Washington State law in the fact that you can essentially pick your party designation on the ballot. You can essentially claim to be a representative of any party. You're not limited to Democratic, Republican, Green, whatever. And in Washington State, we saw in 2008 a lot of people who were Republicans saying they're from the GOP party, or they're from the Conservative Party, or they're from something that didn't use the word Republican. Because, as I'm sure most of you know, good Democrats in this room, Republican is something of a dirty word these days, especially for many Californians, for many Americans. And I think you might see the same thing in a place like San Bernardino or Fresno, where voters should have the knowledge of which party that candidate is affiliated from, and it might be a Democrat, who lists as something else. It doesn't do much for transparency. It doesn't do much for party unity. I think that's actually the purpose of this. The reason Ava Maldonado wants it on the ballot is to divide Democrats and force them to waste their money, time, and resources in extended primary battles.
And we talked a little bit about redistricting, safe seats. Prop 11 passed in November 2008, and I think your organization, helped draft that, and there's going to be an independent, body now going to draw the lines, and as Democrats, Republicans, or as Democrats, we've really been very careful to try to keep communities of interest together, so that the legislature looks like the diversity that California represents. And do you have any thoughts about, what the lines are going to look like, or how they're going to change, or how they're going to be drawn? Has anyone been following all the meetings around the state?
So we're still really involved with the process. I think one of the concerns that folks had when the Prop 11 campaign was going on was that, what are we going to end up with at the end of this? And, as you guys are talking about, the process is extremely important. So how you pick your delegates and how they're representing the state and how they draw the boundaries is extremely important. Organizationally, we're very, very, very involved in making sure that there's a lot of people at that table I unfortunately am not in those meetings, so I can't tell you the details of how it's all playing out.
Yeah, just briefly. I think that this notion that redistricting reform is necessary is frankly wrong. I don't know how you draw a district where San Francisco is going to be competitive. People self-selected live in San Francisco for a reason, right? They like to live in a progressive community. Just as, my conservative right-wing family living in southern Orange County loves living there because it's a deeply conservative community. There are parts of the state that are somewhat balanced, and, you see those reflected in certain elections. I live in a swing Senate district on the Central Coast. But I don't see how you would draw a district that would make San Francisco or southern Orange County balanced or purple without even more massive gerrymandering than what you see going on today. I think that, we need to keep in mind that Californians have the political persuasions they do, right? We live in a purplish state on certain issues, a blue state on others. We've elected a majority to the California state legislature almost every single year since at least 1970. That's a fact. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The problems that we face in California don't really stem, in my mind, from how the districts are drawn. They stem from how the government operates and how the government has been designed to fail, in my mind.
Well, one of the concerns is maybe the Senate. We only have one senator now that represents all of San Francisco because we've got about 800,000 people. And right now we have 2 senators in San Francisco and 2 assembly members. So
I would love to see the state Senate abolished at a constitutional convention and the state assembly quadrupled.
Robert's absolutely correct. In California, we have self-selected into districts, and redistricting, I think, and one person a lot smarter than me on these issues said, I think, would probably only impact 4 districts. When all is said and done, 4 districts that are currently safe would become competitive. It's important that we get our districts right, but it's not a panacea. It's not a solution to our problems. It's a small piece of the puzzle. Districts should be democratic and representative, but I don't think we're that far off that goal with the current districts as they are, because, as I say, we live where we live.
So under the current system, a Republican is not going to be represented in San Francisco, and a Democrat isn't going to be represented in some of the more conservative parts of the state. So the answer to that particular issue is not redistricting. Redistricting potentially can make things more fair. By taking it out of the hands of partisan bodies, it can be made nonpartisan. But the solution, once again, is proportional representation. Under proportional representation, you can elect groups of legislators. You can elect them regionally or statewide, however it works. And in that case, if you elect a Republican slate, then Republicans from San Francisco will have representation. If you elect a Democratic slate from Southern California, the Democrats will have representation, albeit in smaller numbers. Along the lines of the comment of abolishing the Senate and quadrupling the size of the Assembly, colleagues of mine have come up with a proposal that is essentially that. And you can find that at reformcalifornia.org, which is the website for the political reform program. And my colleagues Mark Paul and Micah Weinberg have come up with a proportional representation proposal of 360 members, a unicameral legislature, half elected by districts, half elected by proportional representation.
I mean, if you look at our current state government structure, it was put in place in 1879. The state's population was less than 2 million people, 99% of them white. And we still have those structures, and we still have those districts, and we still have those the Senate and the Assembly seats the same as they were back then. So whatever we do, we need to do something. It needs to be changed.
Just real quick on redistricting, I think I pretty much agree with what you were saying. At least redistricting is never meant to solve the problem. I mean, it's one of a number of reforms that need to be seriously looked at and hopefully implemented to improve a lot of things, from voter registration to civic literacy on the issues. And redistricting, as it was passed, was intended to take the drawing of district lines out of the hands of the legislature and put it into an independent, nonpartisan body. So I think that's what it's intending to do. I think that will be helpful. It's not sort of meant to be the solution, but it's something that's important that I'm glad we have and that we've passed it. And then the other thing I was going to say is, it's interesting with our term limits law, we've got one of the most severe term limits laws in the country, and what it's partially done is it's rendered, the two houses, it's sort of neutered the fact that the Senate, which is supposed to be the deliberative body that, senators are supposed to be in office for quite some time and can sort of review policies and see their impacts, down the road. It's changed that relationship between the Senate and the Assembly because no one's in office long enough to play that role. So I feel like when we think about what the legislature can look like, there's probably a lot of things now that we should start to look at.
Well, thank you very much, Blair, Robert, Dennis, and Matt, for sharing your thoughts here today. And 2010 is going to be exciting. There's going to be initiatives, constitutional convention, elections, like for governor. So stay tuned, and thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us.
Just one quick shameless plug. We have Stay Engaged forums, and if you found any of the stuff that we're talking about here interesting, we'd love to stay in touch with you. And you can also check our website, ca4.org, for a lot more information. And we'll be filing these initiatives really soon, so please stay tuned.
And thank you to the Young Guns for hosting this forum.
Thank you.